Thank you for inviting me. Actually, it's fitting that I'm giving this talk at a church because I don't know if many people don't know, but Colorado Springs, Colorado, for better or worse, is the evangelical Christian capital of the country. It's a county that opted out of recreational marijuana. So there is no recreational marijuana in Colorado Springs. And so, here's my grandmother and my aunt this was an album they did in 1970 from our family church, and they died. And I guess probably the best story to discuss this is, growing up on my mother's side, I had a cousin, Princess, who had lupus, kidneys failed. Her brother gave her a kidney, and then for some reason that kidney failed because they said it had cancer. So, we're religious people. We think, okay, that's just how life is. You have faith. And then on my father, when he had moved into my grandmother's house, his kidneys failed. He got a transplant from a random person in Denver. They had to take that kidney out because they said that kidney was cancerous. So obviously these are paternal, maternal, not related. And then on my mother's side, my 14-year-old cousin a couple of years ago had to get a kidney transplant. And then all of a sudden, in 2017, the Air Force admits that they had been dumping PFAS chemicals into our drinking water for decades. They admitted that the contamination started in 1970, and at the Air Force Academy to this day, there's still the chemicals in the water. And we did some research, found out that 16 of my family members got cancer, and 5 of them have died of kidney cancer, which, if you go see the movie Dark Waters, they did a study of 69,000 people gave their blood, the largest public health study in history. They linked PFAS contamination to kidney cancer. And then we had another cousin, a Vietnam veteran, who married into the family, and he died of kidney cancer. So obviously you have a group of people who weren't interrelated, have kidney cancer. No one in our family, outside of our family, got kidney cancer. One of my grandmother's sisters had 15 kids, so we just have a very large family. And so after that, I just started doing more research and trying to get to the bottom of it, because in Colorado, they've never done an investigation formally. They refuse to do any blood testing. They got some private money to test blood, and our blood levels came up 15 times higher than the national average. And in one little community, it was actually 20 times higher than the national average. And so we've been, trying to fight, but, we're dealing with the DOD, which is a different entity. My mother worked for, the base for 40 years. I was in the military. So, it's just part of our culture there. But so we've been fighting and going around. But the problem is with the DOD, they've admitted before Congress, I think there's 400 military bases contaminated. So for them, if they accept responsibility one place, what the ramifications are going to mean, somewhere else. And so just to give people a perspective, for if you go see the movie Dark Waters, so it's about Parkersburg, West Virginia, DuPont. Everybody's scared of DuPont because DuPont employed 3,300 people in the town, and a lot of people were upset. Why are you suing DuPont? Who ended up settling for, I think, $670 million eventually after 20 years. I think worldwide, DuPont has 98,000 employees. In Colorado Springs, Colorado alone, the Department of Defense employs 100,000 people. The EPA's budget is $1 billion. Department of Defense budget is $759 billion. So when they told the state, gave articles to stop investigating, because the state found out that cancer rates in the areas that were contaminated were 3 different cancers were 3 times higher. The state said, and the EPA both stopped investigating. We don't have a RAB. We've been denied a RAB. And you just see this pattern everywhere, where the contamination is real bad, the military is just taking over, and they let you know on a need-to-know basis. And so that's what we've been fighting up against. That's what, we've been going to Congress, and that's why we're trying to work with other communities, because a lot of communities think they can work in a silo, but you just can't, because if you do one thing for one community, it's going to have that means they're going to have to claim responsibility for a totally different community. And don't think this is political, because, Colorado Springs is probably, the African American population is probably 8%. Trump won Colorado Springs by 70%. So a lot of these areas are wealthy whites, and they've been denied blood testing, and because it's a big, liability issue. So we all have to work together, and in particular, we have to get people of color and communities of color to get out and tell their stories, because it's real. As I testified in Congress, we have Mr. Haynes, my Uncle Mitch. They're buried in the National Cemetery in Denver, Fort Logan. They survived the Korean War, World War II, survived that, but they're buried in the National Cemetery because the Air Force poisoned their drinking water. And because of that, we're one of the few towns where we're actively engaged. I think we probably have 10,000 troops in Afghanistan right now. And so it's a big PR disaster for the DOD to kind of, to let these people know. But, a couple of my cousins, Kevin, while they were in Iraq and Desert Storm, their water was being poisoned. So this is, it's kind of an embarrassing situation. And to make matters worse, we have 5 bases for Air Force, but the Army base in our same hometown, the DOD told them to ban and get rid of PFAS through the foam in 1991, and they did it. By 1997, the Army had already acknowledged that it was toxic, and so they started replacing it. And another thing people should know that we talked about earlier, the PFAS, that's DuPont, but the foam was actually invented and patented by the Navy. And they've done their own research on the AFFF, and we found studies since the 1970s where the Air Force's researchers knew it was toxic, but they kept, using it. And matter of fact, as you all know, as they've testified in Congress to this day, the military has already said they will keep using AFFF. They just, supposedly they won't train with it anymore. But if there's a fire on a military base, they will use AFFF. And that's, and that's what they're doing. And it's a group of 5,000 chemicals. Right now, they're only talking about 2, PFOA, PFOS, but most of you know, if you get your blood tested, it's actually PFHXS that's coming up in high numbers. And so they just had to admit the Air Force Academy in our hometown was contaminated. And when they tested people's well water, they won't even release the PFHX results. They say, no, we're only going to discuss PFOS and PFOA. So what I've been pushing for everyone is that basically communities like ours together, we just have to force Congress to get involved. Because, as I know Newburgh, unlike us, they're suing the Air Force, but as you all know, the Air Force has sovereign legal immunity. So with the extreme, Supreme Court has already ruled unless for some extreme situations, you cannot sue the federal government without their permission first. So, like what happened with Camp Lejeune and their water contamination. So basically, we have to rally Congress to do an investigation and to get on top of this, because that's the only way. We just, when you're talking about the DOD, like I said, a budget of $756 billion. There's just no way each community can fight this, as one. And, as I told them when I testified in front of Congress with Actor Mark Ruffalo a couple of weeks ago, I still have family members in the military. It's part of our culture in Colorado Springs, so we're going to keep joining the military. My father was a deadbeat dad. My mother worked at the Air Force Base 40 years. The Air Force has done more for me than my father did. But that doesn't mean that you get a free pass to poison my family. So and my niece called, says she wants to join the Navy. So we have to do this also for future generations as well. And I know it's embarrassing because, we found where the Air Force and the military scientists had done the study since the 70s, 80s. They knew it was toxic, but, you have to just accept responsibility for what it is. And especially I don't know if people know about the half-life, but the half-life is how long half the chemical stays in your body. It's 8 years. So you're talking about these chemicals, this community, our community, have been drinking for decades, that if you just drink it one time, and 8 years later, half of that chemical is still in your body. So we have to just, come together, and we have to do this, and we have to go door to door knocking, like, I know there's a few African Americans in here. I mean, how many of y'all probably grew up here and know somebody who's on dialysis, right? We was all told, because it was the bacon, it's because of the diet. And you know how we would use these, us in Colorado Springs, where you were mandated going to church 3 times a week, regardless, unless you was independent wealthy or you wanted to be homeless. That's how it was with my grandmother. We just had to, we would come up with all these reasons how to deal with it. But no, now the military has admitted on their own that they've played a significant role in the illness in our communities. And we have to do it. And it's tough because, one thing I've learned going to Congress several times, with the exception of maybe Rand Paul, everybody is scared of the DOD. Wow. All the black congressmen, a lot of them, they are, they're all scared and they're all worried about the DOD. So we're the only ones that can really push this, We're glad this movie has come out because it's, encourage people to go see the movie because it's just an objective education because it's a very, complex issue. But even that, we have to, start door knocking and educating people, especially communities of color, because I was telling Mary, one thing you couldn't see when we testified in the hearing. So, I went to DC and you're thinking, okay, this is a big movie star. Will I get to talk to this person? Or whatever. I'm kind of, naive. I'm a country boy from Colorado Springs, Colorado. It basically, what happened at the hearing, the Republicans tore his behind up from the beginning. They're like, what the heck makes you think you could come in here and talk to Congress? You're not a real doctor. Bruce Banner's a character you played in the movie. You have no right to come here. And basically, it was one of the longest days of my life because basically they knew that was happening, so they needed us to say, no, we are real victims, this is a real issue. And so he would come look at me like he was, shocked by it. So that's why we have to not be afraid to speak up and tell our stories. This has been linked to thyroid disease, lupus, pregnancy issues, attention deficit disorder, all these other issues that for those of us in communities of color, we know it was like, because we was poor, we played too many video games, and we just doing this and that. No, these have all been linked to this phone, so we have to work together and fight it. Because when they first found out the cancer levels were high at home, they first tried to say, that's because you're fat and you smoke. And they denied blood tests, but they got some private money, to test people's blood. And I know, a lot of you know this story, because I tell this people, well, it's on the record now, but my cousin, she talks about LA Times, she probably told it. Well, my 14-year-old cousin had to have his kidney transplant a couple of years ago. My cousin said all of a sudden the doctor said his kidney failed, he had to go on dialysis. His biological father wouldn't even go to get tested. So, luckily I was raised in a matriarchy. She had her current husband, the stepfather, to go get tested, and he was a match, and he gave the kidney. But those of us, we know these stories in our community of people who we just thought, oh, it's bad luck or all these other issues, but no, this water, they've been enough studies done. I know the DOD wants to say we need more studies, but that's just not true. There's been enough studies done, and there's plenty of information, because in a way I talked to other people around the country, in a way a lot of this was a relief, right? Because, a lot of us thought, why us? Why is it bad? This and that. So, there is a reason for a lot of these issues, but if we're quiet and we're embarrassed out of shame to tell these stories, we're not going to get the help or acknowledgement you need. As far as, just two things real quick. My grandmother only has one sister. She didn't move out to the area. My grandmother moved out to the area. My grandmother was dead 12 years later. My grandmother's only sister is 98 years old and lives alone. So I know, that's not scientific, but that just kind of show you, the impact, that it has. And so we just got to, speak up, encourage people to go see the movie. It's not it's not one of those movies like The Avengers. It's going to be a little slow, but just, go tough it out, get the information, and educate people, and tell them, they have to speak up and tell these stories, and so we can be accounted for. I mean, when I testified as far as my grandmother, I told them that, there wasn't enough money in the U.S. Treasury to compensate me for poisoning my grandmother. But if you follow this thing of dark waters, another reason they don't want people to know, in that settlement, which is $670 million, if you had cancer, you got 1.6 to 2 million plus lawyer fees. So it's another reason they don't want people to know about it, because there's a lot of, and that was considered now a small settlement. 3M, I think 2 years ago, they settled for $850 million with the state of Minnesota. So that's just giving people a lot of, people do things for different reasons. And this will give people a lot of incentive to tell their story. So if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, we have time for just like.
So your relatives never really had their blood tested after they had passed away? Were their blood tests done for them?
Oh yeah, that's another thing. So, which is the really thing that got my gall is, I don't know if you heard about what happened with Camp Lejeune. It was a different chemical. The water was tested. A white former Marine, his daughter died, Jerry Esmiger. So he fought years. And so they went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they lost because the North Carolina statute of limitation was 5 years. So technically, since this contamination happened, for 40 years, per Colorado law, you had to sue within 2 years of the death of your loved one. But obviously, if it wasn't public acknowledgement till 2016, if your family member, like my grandmother, she had drank the water, or my cousin Shelton, who I used because he was a decorated Vietnam veteran, retired from the Army and then worked for the Army 20 years. He lived in the area from 1974 till he died of kidney cancer in 2010. Technically, his children, there is no legal way to fight. And same with my grandmother who died before that. So that's why we have to go to Congress, because that's the only way that we can get justice. Yeah, a lot of the other family members, they have, their lawyers took blood, which I don't know what that is, and they've been in the lawsuits. But yeah, the statute of limitations is always a big problem, which is why they want to keep it quiet. Yeah, and run out the clock. Yeah, they do that everywhere.
Is the water supply primarily groundwater wells or surface water bodies?
So I don't know if I mentioned, what makes our contamination, I think we're the only place where the Air Force has acknowledged it publicly. So basically it was both. So basically when they would dump it, so it was groundwater, but then also they would dump the AFFF into the sewer, and then the company would discharge it into surface water, Fountain Creek, and Fountain Creek fed into the Wyfield Aquifer, which was the primary source. And then also, you know, there were rivers around, and they would all feed, eventually little streams would feed into the creek. So the experts say that because, you know, people think mountains in Colorado, but Colorado is really deserty and dry. So they think that really it was the granular groundwater that where most of the chemicals went through, but it was a combination of both surface water and groundwater. And somebody like Chris Higgins at the Colorado School of Mines, he'd be the best person to tell you, you know, which ones was worse. He told me in theory that the surface water is less because, you know, the chemicals are constantly moving, but if they feed into an aquifer, you know.
One more, last question.
Mark, thank you. Can you speak about the defense bill
I'll repeat.
Oh, so
and what you think the main action?
So she asked me, what about the defense bill? So for those of you that aren't political nerds like us, the only bill in the history of this country where Democrats and Republicans agree to pass every year is the defense budget, which goes to show you why taking on the Defense Department is, you know, a whole different animal. So what they tried to do is they tried to put in some PFAS provisions since, you know, the military has acknowledged, you know, they testified over 400 military bases, you know, are contaminated. So they try and put in some regulations into the defense budget this year, which is not passed yet. It's been stalled. And basically, finally, the House Democrats last night have agreed to pass the bill without provisions in the budget which would regulate PFAS. Because it's, I didn't mention that, it's not regulated, it's not, there's no legal enforceable limit. And another thing where I testified in front of Congress is, you know, the gentleman here could tell you, if I wanted to sell PFAS as a pill in a medicine store, by law per the FDA, I have to get scientific testing for like up to 7 years to prove it's safe. However, I can take that same chemical and dump it into the drinking water right now in unlimited amounts, and there's nothing anybody can do about it legally. And you go to the hearing, don't take, like I always tell people, you know, when I testify, don't take my word for it. Go to the hearing, look at the hearing in Congress, you know, where we have to tell the truth. You know, because I tell people the DOD say one thing here, but go see what they testify in front of Congress. And Barrasso, Senator Barrasso, is one of the few Republicans, he's in the Senate to hold a hearing. Maureen Sullivan basically told him, oh, because since that's National Guard, that's not responsibility of DOD. The Supreme Court has said National Guard employees are state employees. So, you know, so they'll come here and say, oh, we're going to do this and that, but then they do something else. And they know not you know, in Congress, they should be telling the truth, because that's why Michael Cohen really went to prison. People forget. First thing he went to prison for was for lying to Congress. So I always tell people, look at what they say, you know, in their testimony in Congress. And so we need to call, a lot of Democrats are saying they're not going to vote for the defense budget because if it doesn't have the PFAS provisions. But I'm a little jaded, you know, I'm from a town of 5 military installations. I know nobody wants to be known as the person who, while military service members are overseas fighting, that they don't get a paycheck. So I don't see that happening. But, you know, call your local congressman, you know, call Speaker Pelosi's office and tell them they need to regulate all these chemicals as a class, and ask them, why is it that the FDA, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, we have to prove these chemicals are safe before they sell them, or why is it, you know, with water it's something different? How many of you, well, you don't have to raise your hands, you know about Zantac, right? The stomach pill?
Yeah.
You heard that you can't buy it now?
No.
Because, you know, Zantac, yeah, they said, a few weeks ago they said that it's been linked to cancer-causing drugs.
Exactly.
So CVS and all these people have pulled it off the shelf.
They pulled it.
you didn't see, they didn't do like the DOD. You didn't hear them say, oh, well, we're going to do another study for 10 years because we need to find out for sure that it really caused, no. Go to CVS and try and buy Zantac.
Hey, Mark, but your president already loosened up the safeguards and even environmental. So how do you expect to win against this guy's a company president? What he's gonna try to do? You think he's gonna loosen up these safeguards?
Well,
He's gonna put these safeguards back in effect again?
Well, you know, that's true, but my thing is, like, if it was my, you know, you poison my grandmother, I don't have any choice.
Okay.
I mean, you know, that's the bottom line. You poison my grandmother, then we just gonna have to go. I mean, those of you African Americans know, you know, you look crazy or talk crazy to somebody's grandmother, you know what the ramifications are.
Right. Yeah.
Now you are talking about you poison her water
Exactly.
for 20 or 30 years, and everything's supposed to be cool, or so that whole people always ask us this. Always in a lot of, as you get upset, they be like, oh, I want to hear some inspiration or hope. I said, I can't tell you that. The bottom line is you admitted when I was minding my own business, you poisoned my grandmother. Therefore, it's a whole different dynamic. I have to do this. If she was the only one poisoned, I would not do anything different. That's just, it's part of our culture. We're a matriarchy, and you know, like I told AOC and Talib, you know, you talk all this stuff, black women, women of color. You know, heard somebody testify that they've poisoned matriarchs, so there has to be some consequences.
That's right.
Whether there's a hashtag for it or not.
I hear you.
Oh,
I just want to ask you a personal question. Are you local over?
I live in Harlem.
You do, that's all.
Yeah, because, I live in Harlem, and when I was visiting my mother, she's like, oh, you know this about over there where your grandmother lived? And I CBS This Morning News said something about the water. And I said, what? And you know, it took me a while. I ain't lying. I flipped on a lot of people in my family. I was like, wait, you talking about the same you knew the same grandmother that, you know, to her religious community when she got pregnant with me? My other grandparents put her out. My other grandmother took her in. I said, that person? And you didn't feel you needed to tell me? You know, so it was, you know, it's a little tough situation, but yeah, I live here, and I was a little late on finding out, but I did, and now my other cousins, you know, we're all involved, we're all, you know, united, and we're a big family, and we're just, you know, just trying to make sure that we're not just, you know, a number. And this last thing I'm gonna say, since we're in the church, so one of my best friends, he grew up in the same area. And his mother, they were Pentecostal. I don't know if there's any Kojic churches in Newburgh. But she would sell barbecue dinners every Saturday and pay for the church's mortgage and tithes. And I remember when she died of cancer, before we knew this happened, you know, my best friend, he was dumbfounded. He went to the pastor, he was like, of all the people, how could my mother not, why couldn't God, you know, save her? And I remember the pastor, Elder Dunn, Kojic Church, you know, he said, you know, he talked about in Revelations, he was like, you know, I really said you die a robber, you should die a robber. So he was like, this person was so good, he was like, I don't even need to read the scripture. He said, the only reason I'm reading the scripture is because how you guys know how you are, you would be out there and say, and he didn't even read the scripture. And, you know, these are women that, as we know, y'all know they're in these communities, they didn't do anything. All they did was pay their water bill and use their tap water. And so you know, so there has to be some accountability and justice for what they've done, you know, to those people. And I know, you know, it's hard and religious because we can rationalize all these things and be like, well, she's a good person, she's gone to heaven, and, you know, for me, it's just a matter of, you know, so like a lack of faith, just in case grandmother was wrong. I don't want her to go out like that. And so, you know, I'll be back and we'll just keep fighting and let's work together.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark, for speaking from the heart and to our hearts.